So, Mr. James Carafano, Senior Counselor of the Vice President of the Heritage Foundation, one of the most renowned U.S. think tanks. Thank you for this interview for CaleaEuropeana in Romania.
Well, thank you for coming to Washington.
Yeah, thank you for accepting us. It was a very important week with the first visit of our Romanian president here. Well, in a multilateral session of the border peace for Gaza. But I would like firstly to start on what is important. Let's say at top level and high level, how do we decrypt in Europe what our main strategic partner is acting on a global stage? We have 1 year of the Trump administration. In a few days now, we will also have his first State of the Union speech since taking again the office. And I would like to start, if possible, with the U.S. national security strategy. We know that some voices in the U.S. conservative national security circles argue that the EU is contributing to civilizational erasure in Europe through migration policy, of course, identity politics, and so on, also regulatory approach. So my first question to you will be, does this narrative influence actual U.S. strategic thinking, or is it more like a political rhetoric?
Well, I think the American concerns about the future of Europe, their competitiveness, their security, level of freedom in Europe, I think those are genuine because we genuinely want and need Europe as a strong partner. But having said that, it's very clear that the overwhelming approach of this president in foreign policy is to be pragmatic. And that means, his job is to do what's in America's interests, and he's going to work with partners that do that. And it doesn't really matter what their political persuasions are. So both those things are actually true.
Oh, but in this idea, do you think that the Washington approach here is more ideological, or we can put it just in this pragmatic frame? Because there is a belief in Europe that this administration actually acts on an ideological premise than of let's say values perspective.
Yeah, well, I absolutely believe that the president's foreign policy is pragmatic, and because it's pragmatic doesn't mean it's devoid of values. I think it has the most appropriate values, which is his job is to do what's in America's interest. And America wants to be a free, prosperous, and secure country, which I think, by the way, is the values of most democracies in the world. So I don't really think there's this conflict between values and interests that's often portrayed. First of all, America's not going to solve Europe's challenges. Only Europe can do that. Europe's made up of sovereign nations, just like the United States is a sovereign nation. People are going to make decisions, are going to determine their future. So, this is true, though, is that what you have in the United States is a rising conservative force in the country. Maybe 50%, maybe more of the country. And it's also true that in Europe, you have, if you count everybody in Europe from the center right to the populace, that's actually a majority of the European polity. And we have many things in common: concern about migration, concern about economic growth, concerns about security, concerns about family and faith and nation. So these are things that we have in common, so it's natural that we're going to look to work together. But what I will say is, and I don't think this is appreciated enough in the United States or Europe, that doesn't mean everybody thinks exactly alike. People here often say, what core MAGA, right? Mm-hmm. Make America Great. Yeah. Well, what is core MAGA? There's actually no such thing. If you look at the American conservative movement, it's actually fairly diverse. Everybody doesn't agree on everything, particularly on issues of foreign policy, for example. So there are core things that we all care about, but we don't agree on everything. And actually, that's exactly what Europe looks like. If you add everybody on the right in Europe, they don't agree on everything. So this notion that somehow there's an alliance, right? That's not really true. It's more of a common sense of what we need to do to move our societies in the right direction. So
but how do we make them overlap? Because you've mentioned and you've touched, yes, we have the issue of migration from different angles. Right. We have the issue of free speech.
Right.
But there is a divide here. Free speech in terms of this American administration is also a stance against censorship. While in Europe
Right.
right now, if we look at France and Germany or the European Commission, this free speech thing goes with regulation. We try to regulate the digital space.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, we don't think it's going to be terribly successful. Regulated free speech in the end winds up being not free speech. And what we had here in the United States, for example, is we did have a lot of emphasis on combating disinformation, and the result of that actually was we wound up with political speech. We wound up with saying the only correct speech is what we say, which is not protecting speech. It's actually distorting the protection of speech. So the problem with the regulatory environment that's overly aggressive is it doesn't actually preserve free speech. It gives you an acceptable narrative, and all other narratives are not acceptable. So this is the real challenge, which is, there's people that are trying to exploit the free speech for malicious behavior, but there's also people that are using the suppression of free speech for malicious behavior, and then there's kind of people who are
in the middle,
and irresponsible. So there, if you look at the American Constitution, and I'm not saying that what we do in the United States is a model for everybody, but if you read the preamble, it basically says we want a prosperous society, we want a free society, we want a safe society. Okay, that's
the end of story.
Yeah, but then when you look in the Constitution, it says, well, okay, which is the most important, right? What happens if I get to something and I have to have more security, and how do I know which is the priority? And you know what the Constitution says? It doesn't tell you. It says all three are important, and the art of governance is you have to struggle to figure out how to preserve all three at the same time. So it's a constant fight, and I think that constant fight is actually healthy. So a lot of times people look at the United States and they go, "Oh, you're always arguing, but I think that's actually the sign of a healthy society. The fact that we're debating over how do we get to the best place, and the notion that debate is actually a sign of a declining society, I think is wrong. I actually think it's a healthy society, and this notion somehow that there's only one acceptable kind of speech and only one acceptable thing, and if you don't follow that, you're not that. I don't think that's healthy. And I don't think
that's an angle to see Europe as a continent in decline or not.
Well, look, I've always said if Europe were a stock
market,
I would buy Europe stock. Right? I think Europe has a very promising future, but it has to address some fundamental challenges, which I think are obvious to Europeans. Even Europeans who said we don't agree with Donald Trump, we don't like anything the Americans are doing. Nobody can deny that Europe has a demographic challenge. Mm-hmm. Nobody can deny that Europe has a
competitiveness issue
and a growth problem. Nobody can deny that Europe has unacceptably high energy prices that are preventing real growth. Nobody can deny that finding free speech and preserving that in a democracy is a challenge. All Europeans left and right acknowledge these are true. So it's not like America, I know it sounds like America's chastising Europeans, but honestly, when I go and I talk to Europeans, they tell me these are the issues that they're really concerned about.
Okay. But also in this national security strategy, we have a phrase which is interesting and challenging, that one of US objectives within Europe is to cultivate resistance against the current trajectory that we have in several member states. And we've seen the visit of Secretary Rubio both in Bratislava and Budapest with two leaders that are, let's say, more keen to this US administration. Do you think that encouraging EU internal fragmentation serves US strategic interest, or the US does not try to cause fragmentation?
Look, the US goal is a strong, free, and secure Europe. And the answer is this administration will work with anybody that can get Europe there, because that's in our interest. Now, the problem with how we describe these things is we tend to just cherry pick the stuff that we want to talk about and we ignore the rest. So a lot of people point to the negative comments in the national security strategy and ignore the sentence at the end which says Europe is a critical strategic partner for the United States, and this is a valuable relationship. People say, oh, well, Rubio went to Slovakia and he went to Hungary. because he likes them. But he also went there to say, how are you guys going to get off of Russian energy? Because you being on Russian energy and Russian energy imports are just fueling the war against Europe.
And before that, he went to Munich, reaching out to Europe.
Exactly. So look, it's not this kind of Manichaean, you either like us or you don't thing. It says, we love you, right? You have challenges.
We are your child, as Rubio said.
You succeeding in your challenges is actually our success. We would like to help and partner with that, but we can't force solutions on Europe that Europe doesn't want. And you can't just say it's the United States kind of telling us what to do, because a lot of what President Trump is saying, a lot of what Rubio is saying, a lot of what J.D. Vance is saying, is what a lot of Europeans are saying. Now, you can say that half of Europe doesn't know what they're talking about, but they're half of Europe, so I can't think they kind of get a vote.
You mentioned that this administration has a goal, a prosperous and free Europe, and it has always been the goal. But other administration also put another word to this one: united Europe. Is this also the goal of the United States administration? Because we see and we know that this administration has and tries to preserve a close relationship with Europe, but there are a lot of spats with Brussels and with the European Union.
So look, I mean, I think what we mean when American conservatives mean is a Europe that is whole, free, and prosperous and secure, right? That doesn't necessarily mean in our minds that is a single governance structure that's governing all of Europe equally, right? Europe is a collection of nation states.
Yeah.
Our idea of a Europe whole is these nation states cooperating and collaborating with each other to mutual benefit. It doesn't mean about diminishing national sovereignty. And quite honestly, I would argue from our perspective that the diminishment of sovereignty is actually creating a lot of the problems in Europe. And energy is, I think, probably the penultimate example. We have an energy policy which is really being driven by Brussels, which is giving higher prices, less energy, and less reliable energy. It almost resulted in Europe becoming entirely, before the Ukraine war, entirely dependent on Russian gas. So, consolidation of power doesn't necessarily bring greater competitiveness, more freedom, and more security. That's why you have national sovereignty. I mean, in the United States, okay, we're one country, but our states actually have an enormous amount of freedom and independence in a lot of things in what they can do. And you see that reflected in the states, right? Some states are doing really well or gaining population and getting wealthier. Others aren't because they made stupid decisions. So sovereignty is about having the capacity to make your decisions, and governance is about whether you're smart or stupid in that, right? So the notion that somehow, and this is an outsider's perspective, but when people say, well, we need all of Europe to get it because that's who we're going to scale to compete with the United States and China. And that's just not true, because Europe is not the United States and China, right? You're never going to scale like the United States because you're a bunch of sovereign nations, right? You're never going to scale like China because China's an authoritarian state and they got their scale through mass just telling everybody what to do. Europe's never going to be any of those things. And actually, I think this is a non-argument. The notion that we are moving to some European superstate, I think that idea is already dead. And that's not me wishing it or me, projecting myself on Europe. This is what Europeans tell me. I don't think the bulk of Europeans are any more interested in a European superstate. I just think that's a reality.
You raised the ball, and we will go to the strategic theater of competition. But I have one more question on this. Do you believe, and we've seen what happened in Munich at the Munich Security Conference. Before Secretary Rubio taking the stage, it was there Chancellor Merz of Germany saying that ultimately in this great rivalry power politics, not even the United States can go alone when its leadership is contested, merely by China, but also by the actions of Russia. Do you think that American power or hegemony, let's put it this way, power projection as the main preeminent of the global system, depends on a strong Europe and unified Europe partner or not?
The United States cannot go it alone. Matter of fact, there's no power in the world today that can recreate kind of what you had in the Cold War or in the age of imperialism, with a hard sphere of influence over a significant area that you have military. That nobody has that. We don't have it. Nobody has it in the world today. It's just not there. So, and if you actually read not just the American National Security Strategy, the American Defense Strategy, if you actually look at the actions of the President of the United States is not trying to go it alone. We have three critical theaters that are vitally important to us because we're a global power with global interests and global responsibilities. And what connects us to the world? I mean, and the three big lily pads are Western Europe, which is not only an economic engine that's important in the United States, one of our largest trading partners, but if you look, for example, at when U.S. does military operations, 50% of the military operations that we do in the European theater have nothing to do with Europe. We use Europe as a jumping board to go other places, right?
Yeah.
So Europe, the Middle East, the Middle East is vitally important to all of us. It's a crossroads of energy and air traffic and finance and everything. I mean, it's called the Middle East for a reason. It's in the middle. And then obviously Asia.
And the Indo-Pacific
right.
as a large.
So the United States has to be present and protect its interests in all three theaters. And we don't have sufficient hard power resources to do that in a sustained way in any theater. You can arrest a Maduro, you can bomb in Iran, but the United States can't tell any region of the world, you must do this and enforce that. We just can't. So the only way the United States can protect all its interests is if it has partners. So are European allies critical to the strategy of the United States and important partners? Absolutely, you bet. Are there allies and partners in the Middle East that are absolutely? Same thing in the Indo-Pacific. So yes, there is no world in which the United States survives and thrives as a nation in which it is just isolated by itself and not partnering with anybody else. Just never happens.
So basically the United States needs Europe and other allies to be structurally capable of sustaining, let's say, both theater competition with China mainly and with Russia at a lower scale.
So this is a really important point, and it really reflects the essence of Trump's second presidency. I call Donald Trump the old man in a hurry because
he has 3 more years.
He has 3 more years, and that's it. And
that's a good quote, actually.
Yeah. So in his first term, he was deeply frustrated. There was a lot of opposition. He had trouble putting a team together. They fought him tooth and nail for 4 years. Then they spent 4 years trying to put him in jail. He didn't like at all what he saw was happening in those 4 years, and so he comes back, and he really has now only 3 years to and I don't like the word legacy, because legacy is like how I'm remembered, and I don't think that's important to Donald Trump. What motivates Donald Trump is I want to solve big problems and keep them solved for a time, and there are really 2 priorities. One is peace through strength, right? That America's only secure if it can demonstrate to its rivals and enemies that I can protect my interests. And again, he has to have friends and allies in all 3 theaters to do that. And the other is economic growth, prosperity. He has to deliver on prosperity to the American people. That's what he promised. That's what's going to get Republicans reelected. That's what's going to keep strong. That's what's going to pay for $1.5 trillion defense budget every year. And again, he needs partners for that as well. So America's integrated into the world. And actually, if we've seen anything, Trump is clearly not an isolationist. And if you actually look at the root of all of the steps, he's actually improved not just American interests, but the lives in parts of the world for people where the U.S. engage in. But he's a very impatient guy, and he's in a real hurry to do that. And so I say it's like, yes, he needs friends and allies, right? But he needs the allies he needs, not necessarily the allies he has. And so where allies are not stepping up to their responsibilities, whether it's in collective security or economic security or energy security, you have a very impatient president that says, look, we are partners, but you have got to pull your weight. And that, I think, is the pressure that a lot of people feel.
Before moving to Romania, because you have an interest in our country and analyzing and understanding what's happening in our part of Europe, one more question on this. Where would you put Europe's place in this bigger, wider U.S.-Chinese rivalry and strategic competition?
Yeah. So when people ask me that question, it's like a guy's got a car.
Okay.
And somebody says, well, what's the most important part of the car? Is it the wheel? Is it the brakes? Is it the tires? And my answer is, what difference does it make? They all have to work for the car to work. So you could say, well, what's more important? Is Europe or the Middle East or Asia? And the answer is, they're all important. And this is like Sophie's choice. You can't ask me to pick one because it's just not going to work. Actually, for all this discussion about pivot to Asia and China and everything else,
that's a reality. Well, no.
No, it's not a reality actually. Because if you look at the president's first year in office, he has spent way more time on European affairs and on Middle East affairs than he has on Asian affairs. And the reason for that is because there's arguably maybe more things to do, but all three theaters are important. So Europe is important, but here's the thing is you shouldn't care about me. You should care about Europe, right? Europe's important to Europeans. A lot of the freedom and the safety and prosperity is going to be on the decisions that Europeans make, not the decision that Donald Trump makes.
Okay, with all of this, let's move to Romania. How you mentioned that the United States needs allies and partners in all those three theaters.
Yeah, right.
In the European theater somehow, in the European sphere, and in the Middle East, we can see Romania over there.
Right.
Because it's an important country on the eastern flank. And we also had President Dan here at the initial Board of Peace meeting. What's your take on this visit?
Well, the two critical things for the U.S., okay, like I said, one is security, one is prosperity. The security goal is very clear for the president. He wants increased conventional deterrence in Asia, in the Middle East, and in Europe. And in all three ways, the biggest factor to do that is increasing the capabilities of friends and allies. That's how you're going to get more. And Romania is absolutely vital because the number one physical threat to Europe is Russia. The number one way to block that threat, I mean, we talk about little green men and disinformation and hybrid warfare, but the number one thing is conventional deterrence, that the Russians have to believe that there's not land in Europe that they can take ever. And so when you look at that, I think not just because of the 5% spending, but everything that's done, Europe's actually has greater potential for conventional deterrence today than it did when I was stationed in the military in the Cold War. You have more strategic depth, got a much longer flank with Finland and Sweden and Norway. And you have three super critical important countries that are the centerpiece of NATO deterrence against Russia. One is obviously Poland. Poland is the new West Germany, right? It is right in the middle of the front line. It's a massive obstacle. You have liberal and conservative governments in Poland. They're all committed to defense. The second most important country is Ukraine. Doesn't matter if Ukraine's in NATO or not, because the Russians can never attack NATO and just drive by Ukraine and wave, right? So Ukraine is a factor for the Russians, whether it's actually part of NATO or not. It's part of the future of NATO deterrence. And the third one is Romania. I mean, Romania is the indispensable, it is the anchor of the eastern flank, right on the Black Sea. So from a security standpoint, a strong Romania capability is really important.
How should we translate this?
Well, let me go the economic side is energy, critical minerals, economic development. These are all things where the United States wants to partner with Europeans to be stronger. Romania has lots of these things. So on the defense side, I think Romania is making very smart engagement with the United States, not just in weapons purchases and increased capability, but the strategic facilities that Romania is building up for NATO and its allies. Those are going to be invaluable. So that's super critical. And in the end of the day, the security of the Black Sea is really going to come from Romania, Bulgaria, Turkish cooperation capability. So
we are building right now.
Yeah, and the Romanians so I think from a defense standpoint, what the Romanians are doing are spot on, and I think it's greatly appreciated in the United States. commitment to the 5% spending and all that. I think Romania gets A's across the board on that. And from the economic perspective, and this really pleased me, and I think it reflected in the President Dan's visit here. The things that Romania brings to the table that are valuable to the U.S., both from an economic and economic security perspective, conventional energy, nuclear energy, critical mineral development, both upstream, downstream, a platform for the future economic integration of Moldova and Ukraine into the larger economy for Stabilis area, connecting to the Black Sea, developing the port, Kutanz. And these are all things which are just right in America's wheelhouse and America's interest, and partnering on these things are great. So these are the things that Romanians and Americans have been talking about.
How do we insert all of this under the auspices of the strategic partnership?
Well, my thing is, and I think we're headed in that direction, is a good friend of mine once said is Trump likes deals that are big, bold, and beautiful, right? So big is a big number, right?
Yeah.
And if you bundle together all the economic and security related activities that the United States and Romania could do together, that number would look pretty massive. And so that, I think, makes that very attractive to the United States. Beautiful says, that, it is touching a lot of things which are critical in the United States. And
like being here at the first Board of Peace meeting.
Well, I think that I think that helps as a trust and confidence builder with it. I also think it's good for Romania. It's demonstrating, independence of thought and leadership in the region. That we're not going to be, told, how to act on the world stage. So I think it sends a good, strong signal that there's an independence of mind in Romania, so I think that's respected here. So,
and the bold part.
Yeah. So, well, the bold thing is we've got to put a deal on put that deal on the table, because things that are good for the United States, good for Romania, I think it's all there. I think all the pieces are that. And then when you look, for example, at America's other interests, very interested in the Middle Corridor, connecting South Caucasus and Central Asia. Romania
Vice President Vance was there in Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Yeah,
we have a strategic partnership with Azerbaijan.
Right, and Romania is absolutely critical because Romania is really the gateway, right, from the Middle Corridor into Europe. Same thing with IMEC. The Middle East corridor, that's going to come up, that's going to connect into Southern Europe. A lot of that's going to go in Romania to go to other places. So I think Romania's right there. It's the boldness of vision to put all that package together and drive the development of the U.S. and I see good signs of that from this government. I mean, I think you've got to be proactive. I mean, this is the one thing that we've seen across the board. Who are the people that are being really successful with the President of the United States? And it's the people that are pushing forward and say, you've got a problem, I've got a problem. Let me tell you how we can help solve that problem. I think joining the Board of Peace is showing that I want to proactively
as
help
an
with
observer
that.
still, but
Yeah, right. But if you look, for example, like very successful deal with Australia came forward proactively and put things on the table. Same thing with Japan. Actually, Germany has been very constructive. Italy, and so these are the countries, I think, Finland. So these are the countries that are really, I think, making hay with the administration by being proactive, because they understand what Trump is trying to do. They recognize that there's a lot in this for us, and so they're pushing forward with their own initiatives, and I think that's appreciated by the United States, and the United States responds well to that. So, best example of that is really Armenia and Azerbaijan, right? Where they brought the U.S. in, they got the U.S. engaged in TRIP, in the Trump corridor, helped seal the deal, peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan, help spur U.S. interest in economic development. And what was the result of that? J.D. Vance goes there, and he walks away with a $9 billion investment in Armenia.
Thank you very much, Mr. James Carafano, Senior Counselor of the President of the Heritage Foundation. Thank you for this interview.
No, thank you for having me.